All right, everybody, welcome to Compliance in Motion today. I'm so excited to have Ruth Bowdish here with me. This is somebody that I've crossed paths with in the industry off and on, but haven't had quite the opportunity to have an in-depth discussion like we're going to have today. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about your background before we jump into our first question and how you've kind of taken that expertise and education and brought it into companies and your customer base and just kind of connect the dots for us.
Sure, yeah, and I appreciate the opportunity to do so. So when I originally started my college career, it was for sociology, and I wanted to save the world, right? So that was my mission. But unfortunately, as life happens, I got off track a little bit and got married, had a couple of kids. Marriage was not that great, and before I knew it, I was pretty much destitute with two children,
Oh
living
no.
in and out of a van for a little bit. So
Oh boy.
yeah, that's a long story.
Yeah.
But happy to tell it, but it's a long one. But the on-demand at the time it was called on-demand drug testing. They were looking for a collector, and I was looking for a job. And the owners are Tom and Stephanie Ivany, and I interviewed with them back in 2011. And I did not have my college degree at that time. I'd stepped away from college before I could earn my bachelor's degree. And then life moved forward as it often
Yeah.
does. I met a wonderful man and went back to school, got married,
Yeah.
whole nine.
That's
And
that was quite a full plate of things to get done all at one time. I mean, usually, you're looking at your education and your backgrounds and things like that, and then seeking out the career. But to do all of that at the same time while working with kids really is quite the feather in your cap. So congratulations for a successful move on your part. Now, today you're the managing director.
yeah.
And yeah, so tell us what that means. What's your day to day like?
Well, that's tough. We are the parent company of also of on-demand counseling and New Day Recovery. So in 2015, when I had the opportunity to go back to school, I became a licensed counselor to kind of help that up and running. And I worked with individuals battling addiction one-on-one for many years as a counselor.
Hmm.
When I came back to occupational medicine, I'd always kind of had, we're the same company, so I've always had my foot in this aspect as it was. But I was able to become an EAP, which is an employee assistance professional, which allowed me to kind of bring all of that stuff together to our clientele as on demand. So and so on demand drug testing started obviously as drug testing, and then we grew to become more occupational medicine based, to where we offer a whole bunch of different services. And when I started, we had 5 employees and 100 companies. And right now we're a little over 2,000 companies across the country that we're servicing. And so it's really been a grassroots growth for me. And I'm so blessed to have had that opportunity because it really gives me an appreciation for every role that is here. I know what it's like to be that on-call collector and get that call at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I know what it's like to deal with somebody that doesn't want to be here at the front window.
Really,
So,
with your
yeah.
with your depth and breadth of expertise and depth and breadth of business portfolio, you have heard and seen it all across the industry. Maybe we could kick this off a little bit to so that our listeners and viewers are kind of grounded with a foundation of understanding. Tell us, in your opinion, how would you define or describe what on-demand occupational medicine is to a business?
Well, we have strived to be a one stop shop for the health and safety of workforces.
Hmm.
We want to make sure that when people show up for the job, that they are able to perform the essential functions of that job safely. Whether that means being drug free or that means being able to lift 25 pounds without self injury, making sure that they're physically fit to do so. We wanted to make sure that the valleys areas businesses here, whether it was manufacturing, construction work, and industries actually all across the board, had that good employee base that they could count on, and that those employees had a place that they could come to as well if there
Right.
were any problems.
Yep.
So that's kind of what we are. We want to provide safe and healthy working environments, I
Right.
guess is the best way to put that.
Which is obviously critically important no matter what vertical market or industry you're in. I know we work with companies coast to coast as well, predominantly in manufacturing, construction, and all the skilled trades. And we hear it all the time where they're hiring an individual and, like take a paving company. They're hiring somebody and they're coming for the interview and the person really wants the job genuinely. And then they go to the first day of employment and they find out, oh, this job is not for me. I can't physically perform the task, or I didn't realize it was going to be so hot and I don't have that much of a heat tolerance. So that was just one example. How often are you finding across the country as you're working within the industries and talking to groups of people, do people have a business practice in place where they're actually aligning people's capabilities and physical or health requirements to the position at hand? Or do you find that this step often gets missed?
I think that it's more industry specific, so more in the safety sensitive or construction where the chance of injury might be a little bit greater.
Hmm.
Over the years, we have seen it expand into some other industries. Obviously, we would love to see it expand even further. But to be very transparent, a lot of times a company or organization will look to this because of a problem that they've experienced,
Okay.
because they did hire somebody that maybe was not physically qualified for the job and they got injured, which is, a
So
travesty. Yeah. So they then ask us, is there a way that you can help prevent this from happening again?
right, because I know that in our core area of focus that literally the statistics of that new hire for the first 90 days, that is the primary group that's experiencing injury rates the most. And it has to do probably from because of mismatched skill or physical ability. Can you give us any kind of real world examples of where you've seen uh, the way it used to be, and then some corrective action taken, and how it is for that company today?
Probably one of the best examples that I can think of right off the top of my head is we worked with a school system to ensure that their bus drivers were able to act in an emergency situation. So, are they able to lift up a child if they have to? Are they able
Oh.
to walk down the length of the bus? And so, in our essential functions room here, we actually have a platform that is the exact distance from the back of the bus where the emergency exit is to the
Mhm.
ground. And
Mm.
so this school system makes sure that every single one of their bus drivers can safely navigate that distance without ladder, step stool, or help. Because there was an incident where someone, I don't know if they broke their ankle or twisted their ankle, and they wanted to make sure that that bus driver might be the main point for those kids that might be in a situation, and that they are really focused on making sure that those individuals can perform the essential functions of that job. But there's 100 different examples I could probably provide.
I would imagine so too. So you're looking at not only the core competencies, like in the school bus, you have to be able to drive a bus safely and navigate all that things, but then there's other things that need to be done. So I would imagine your level of expertise and being in this occupational medicine and alignment between the person and the job at hand, you're able to offer up, like, yes, you're looking at the core, but you should also be looking at these other five things. Is that often the case where you help people expand their checklist, if you will?
Yes, and it's actually one of our parts of our business model. We don't like to say no too often. So if a company has a request, we usually find a way of making it happen. A lot of companies still think that we're just drug testing and just physicals, and they don't know that we do pulmonary function tests or chest X-rays or respirator fit tests and all these other things that are all extremely important to make sure that those workers remain healthy and safe on the job.
Yeah, well, without a doubt. So when you're looking at the industry, so like we're thinking about OSHA, thinking about specific regulations and things like that. Um, how would you comment on an employer's obligation to do these kinds of things, to stay compliant and to ensure they're aligned properly, perhaps with their workers' comp model programs?
Well, of course, we all know that OSHA's general duty clause makes it the employer's responsibility to provide that safe work environment. And we come in and try to make sure that they're doing that in every way possible, making sure we look at ergonomics. We have a safety instructor, Tom Miles, that comes in and can do safety trainings for organizations, safety audits for companies to make sure that they are doing everything that they can do for their employees to kind of help with that. And then we offer solutions, and if for some reason we can't provide that solution, we find ways for them to find it.
Got you. So you're really helping people shore up where they're not compliant, get at least at the bar or above it, depending upon
Mhm.
maybe what their corporate culture is. Now, when you go into an organization, how important is leadership and corporate culture in really embracing, the employer's obligation to their employees and their business?
It's everything. I mean, it's honestly, it's everything. They're gonna set the lead. That's why they're leaders, right? They're gonna set the model. I often say that if a leader is 15 minutes late, then their team is probably 10 minutes late, right? So,
Mhm.
it's critically important that the supervisors understand the importance of what it is that we're doing, that they understand that their critical role in providing those safe work environments, it's not just lockout, tagout, or PPE, which is vitally important, don't get me
Mhm.
wrong, but it's also understanding what safety culture is and understanding that it's a split second that these accidents happen in. And so to pay attention if somebody is, unfortunately under the influence of drugs or alcohol on the job, what can we do about that? If you see an employee struggling to accomplish a task, if the leader's not in the right mind frame, they could just maybe criticize that employee instead of actually looking at it as a possible safety situation.
Mhm. So are there areas where you go into an organization and you're talking to them where you can see clearly where they're falling short in their process of aligning with occupational medicine best practices? And how do you go about helping people like do a risk assessment to identify where they might have gaps in their process that are bringing undue risk to the business?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Because we do a lot of work with the Department of Transportation as well, especially with drug and alcohol compliance. If we notice a company does not have the right, forms for an internal audit that could potentially happen on a federal level, we would automatically bring in those DOT regulations and let them know where they're lacking. As far as safety situations are concerned, even drug testing policies, which I write policy, I do a lot with that. We always do. The first question we're going to ask is, who do you need to be compliant with? Is there a non-bargaining? Is there a union? Is there federal regulations, state regulations, OSHA, that industry and that specific task, whatever it is, who do you need to be compliant with? We look at that and then we see if they are compliant. And if they're not, we give them this is the roadmap basically, like this is what you need to do in order to become compliant. A lot of companies, especially here in the area, I'm very proud to say that a lot of them are right where they need to be. So then our next step then is to give them best practice and say, this is what we would, I guess we could say, not assume, but this is something that we would project that could be a potential benefit for you and your organization. And it could be an essential functions, and we could show them how this could reduce. We have a nurse triage hotline, which is
Mhm.
a 24-hour nurse triage. So if there's a non fatal injury, instead of just having this employee go to the emergency room and sit there for 6 hours and get frustrated, we have, telephonic virtual system where they could be assessed over the phone,
I've just
and then, yeah, either at home care or
Yeah,
be referred to an urgent care. So it's beneficial for everybody. And we look at the company and we look at the employee. We always say that we have two clients. We have the company, the business company that's a client, and then we have all of their employees are our clients as well.
that's a great distinction because the reality of it is both need to be satisfied with the end product in a way that they stay safe and compliant with the job expectations, and that their physical aspect of doing the job doesn't become something that either ends up causing injury to them, but also, perhaps to others around them. So it sounds like there's two components. The first component is this: what industry you're in, what regulations do you have to comply with, what state are you in, taking all of that information, getting your arms wrapped around it, creating a play-by-play action plan to shore up to where you need to be in your occupational medicine program from date of hire starts. The second component sounds like now you're up and running. So there's a process that you need to stay in sync with. Tell us about like the process that people is this like a software automated thing that people tend to track all of this stuff in? Is it mostly they have systems that you're trying to integrate into at the company to sustain this process over time? I imagine just like anything else, sustaining and consistency are two big challenges for many of your customers.
Definitely. So the first thing we do is we offer annual and quarterly trainings to get, maybe they're even just a half an hour, to make sure that everybody had new employees that have been hired, maybe new supervisors that have been promoted, that everybody's on the same page and everybody knows what those expectations are going to be. For example, if we have a Department of Transportation physical, a medical exam that needs to be completed, that has to be uploaded into the federal registry, and then the state has to be able to contact the federal registry in order for that individual to be allowed to perform safety sensitive functions or, operate a commercial motor vehicle. All of
Mhm.
those systems have to work together. We are able to
Gotcha.
offer our employers, excuse me, a web-based platform. They log in and they're able to get all of that information that they may need. If there is an audit or if there is a problem, they're able to access a lot of that information. And then one of the things that I am just absolutely love about on demand is that when you call, you're going to get a hold of somebody.
Mhm.
We have people available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to answer questions, to help people out. If there's an issue, we will find a solution for you. Very customer service oriented. So
Yeah.
yes, we do use a little bit of software.
Yeah.
But there's also still that human component a part of it.
Absolutely right. And it's just so important to have that balance between the two. Sustainable, automated, streamlining, saves time, doing all of that with technology and foundation, which is a large part of what Ving brings to the table when managing compliance across an organization, just from a different point of view than what you're doing. But then you do have to have that human interaction. You do have to have that support team that you can go to make sure that um, you're solving the right problems with the right
Yes.
solutions, and then that you're implementing them in a way that you can sustain them over time. When I want to talk about two other things before we kind of move into the next section here. Talk to us a little bit about mm, uh, the legalization or acceptance, I don't know what the right word is, of marijuana and the challenges that it is. There's the edibles out there now. You can literally purchase marijuana, so we all know what's going on in there. And it's super complicated by state, by company policy, after attending several workshops over the past couple of years. There's also, when people are drinking alcohol, it tends to only stay in their system for a period of time. But certain types of legalized marijuana stay in their system even longer. And so now I'm coming to work the next day, but oh, well, I took that edible yesterday. Well, it still could be in your system.
Mhm.
What kind of advice or like insights can you share with our listeners today about this very volatile issue?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I'm actually heading to Washington D.C. in October to meet with some legislators about the rescheduling efforts on some of those. So I'm the Ohio State affiliate for the National Drug and Alcohol Screening Association,
Okay.
and so we try to get as much up to date information as you can. Best advice, without, spending an hour talking about it, which I could easily do,
Yeah.
is, the first thing is to understand what an employer's rights are. Now, in the state of Ohio, employers have retained the right to continue to test for and then have any subsequent adverse action for an individual who tests positive. So regardless of the legalization of that narcotic of cannabis, an employer can still dismiss, can still terminate an employee for testing positive. And that's how it's been. Problem is, because it's so frequently being used now, and because it's so frequently available, the employers are asking questions, and are we missing out on some of our employment pool by doing this drug test.
Okay.
Is this something there? And my first thing would say is that employers across the board need to be educated on what we're talking about. Need to understand, a lot of people think that we can regulate it like alcohol. We cannot. Alcohol is water based, cannabis is fat based. Alcohol, we have legally defined standards of impairment: 02, 0.02, 0.04, 0.08. We have not only the legally defined levels of impairment, we also have a controlled way of measuring it, a breathalyzer, which gives us a confirmation number. So we have a legally defensible result from an employment standpoint. That does not exist for marijuana or for any other substance. So while we look at them kind of similar, they really are worlds apart. So we do not have, as of today, a way to determine impairment. If we look at a urine test, they could go back 6 weeks for a frequent user who's using edibles, because edibles and vapes are going to be highly concentrated, which means they're going to stick to those fat cells even a little bit more than somebody who might be using some of the plant material. So there's just
It's
there's a
all of
lot that goes into
Yeah,
it.
which
And
even it reinforces to our listeners today, you really do need to get connected with people who are in the know and have a level of
Mhm.
expertise, because when you structure your program for your company, you need to be aware of what you can do and what you can't do and what the restrictions are for identifying when substance is impairing somebody in the workplace. And so many companies in our core industries are, they'll do drug testing as a way to decide to hire somebody. But with the widespread use, I could see how people were thinking about their level of tolerance in that initial thing. The challenge then becomes for people out on a job site to be able to recognize when there's physical impairment, um, even if it's not visible, like somebody who's drunk, where you could smell it on them, or you could see that something's wrong. Sometimes these traces of medical marijuana or cannabis, however it was ingested, th- people aren't necessarily uh, unable to walk, but they may not be as reactive if they're driving a forklift or a vehicle or something like that. Is that kind of a way to kind of frame it in for?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, definitely. So, because an employer is unable to determine if an employee is under the influence on the job, did they use that morning? Did they use on break? Or did they use a week ago? No way of being able to tell that. So, it's critically important that supervisors are continuously trained in spotting the signs and symptoms and knowing how to approach those situations if they are to occur.
Yeah,
And again, we are looking at no two states that have legalized marijuana have the exact same rules. It is still illegal on a federal basis. So anyone who falls under federal jurisdiction, whether it be DOT or HHS or some of those other ones, they are still held to that standard as marijuana is illegal.
yeah,
And so they're not allowed to have it in their system. But for every other company, and if you're part of the BWC Drug Free Safety Program, which is now the SUPR, the super system for your drug free policy for the state, they follow the federal model. So that's also something that employers have to kind of take into consideration when they're reevaluating their policies.
gotcha. Another area that I wanted to touch on, and you briefly mentioned it already in our discussion today, is that of like telehealth kind of engagement with an employee at a company in the field. This is a big topic of discussion because there are different types of rules and regulations that you need to follow per OSHA guidelines for different types of injuries. And there's also reporting instructions for different type of industries. And depending upon what gets reported, is either an expense to the company or a height or an exponential expense to the company. So talk to me a little bit about this. We have some customers who, let's say there's a minor injury, where they normally might have sent somebody, oh, my ankle, I twisted it, I think I broke it, or I sprained it. They're immediately sending them to the ER room, which triggers a lot of reportable OSHA activity, a lot of off work pay. There's just
Yeah.
a domino effect. I've heard of, well, we have a lot of customers who have started implementing a first check telehealth from a designated conference room, which is like a, a sick bay kind of a thing,
Mhm.
and they're dialing in to a service, and there's somebody on the other end who's educated and can do the initial inspection and make a determination of yes, you should go to the ER, or no, you're fine. It sounds like just like a sprain. So schedule yourself an appointment with your doctor Tuesday, whenever you can. Tell us a little bit about that aspect of using telehealth um, on the spot at the employment to prevent a chain reaction of other activities.
Yeah, definitely. So when we are looking at non-life threatening injuries, and so we always want to stress that because obviously if somebody is looking at a life threatening
Right.
emergency, those are the ones that are going to the emergency room. So a lot of these
Sure.
other ones we can look at otherwise. So by making that phone call, we are having a medical professional make the determination instead of a supervisor. If that phone call does, require a medical follow-up, it can usually be the next day at an urgent care, which is going to save a little bit of time and perhaps even from a financial consideration. We also realize that about 42% of our calls do result in at-home care. So that is something that is also necessary. We focus on what we call appropriate care. We
Mm,
want to make sure that employees are getting the care that they're needed, but I also call it kind of like the Bermuda Triangle of healthcare because we have three different components, right? We have the healthcare facility, we have the employer, and then we have the employee. And there's this conception that we're all fighting against each other and that nobody's ever going to be on the same page. And unfortunately, the few bad apples on any of those sides end up making the rules for everybody else, right? So we have, the mentality that employees are just trying to get off work. We have employers that are just trying to get their employees back, and healthcare facilities are just trying to make money. Um, the fact is, we're actually really more aligned than most people think. There are, I believe, I don't have statistics to back this up, but I believe that there are many more accidents that are not reported because employees do not want to miss work. They do not want to for 2 weeks and wait for a check to come to them. They want to continue to work. They need their job. They love their job. So what do? They zip tie it around. My husband's a blue collar worker. He's going to zip tie that, and kind of get back on the job.
duct tape, whatever.
Duct
Yeah,
tape,
right.
yeah, with the electrical tape, whatever he can
Yeah,
find, let me tell you.
don't do
Because
that.
he I know,
Yeah,
I try to
just
tell him,
yeah, just to be
"Don't do
clear,
that."
just to be clear,
Yes.
listeners, don't do that. Yeah,
We are not advocating
yeah,
this,
right. Yeah,
by all means, but what we do is, make sure that with that phone call, with that very brief intervention, we are able to provide all the information for our OSHA recordable if we need to, an OSHA
mhm,
report. We have first report of injury. All of that information is gonna be given out after the phone call, and they can say, "You know what? I'm actually feeling pretty good. I think I can go back to work."
yeah,
And the nurse may say, "Okay, then go ahead and get back to work." It increases the care of each employee, so it's a service. They don't have to worry about being labeled as somebody who wants to get off of work, but yet they can still make sure that their injury is getting treated
which
appropriately.
is the most important thing. And when something that happens, I know our company philosophy is when we're talking to customers and things like that, is that yes, safety, compliance, all of this is important, but really at the end of the day, it's about making sure that employee can go
That's right.
home in the same physical condition that they arrived at work. They are oftentimes the person that is paying the bills, meeting the kids after school. There's a lot going on. And as employers, we have to make sure that our corporate philosophy around job safety and occupational uh, physical injury prevention starts all the way back a day of hire, day of interview, so that you know
Mhm.
that you're matching the right person with the right job. Now, as we go into the last segment of our podcast today, I'd like you to focus in on kind of like the business case for taking a closer look at, whether you feel like you've got your program nailed down and it's up and running, or you just listened to our podcast today and your head spinning going, "Oh my gosh, we just hire people and put them out there." Um, what like two or three key points would you leave listeners with as a call to action? Regardless of the state of your existing program, you should be doing these things.
I would first say that the best accident is the accident that doesn't occur. a lot of what we do, whether it's PPE, safety glasses, a lot wearing our safety belt in our car. A lot of what we do is to prevent injury, to prevent accidents from occurring, and having your employees, which is your most valuable commodity, ensure that they are being taken care of first and foremost. Everything else kind of falls into place. So it starts with a safety culture. Starts with understanding that we're not just checking off a box on a
Right.
required form, that we are understanding that injuries are preventable, that we want people who are focused. We want people who are here in the now. And if you're not, if there is a problem, that we have ways and means of helping you through all of that. That's psychological safety is getting, a lot of momentum because if you're worried about paying your mortgage, you're not worried about where you're stepping.
Right.
So it's making sense of all of those types of things. So I would say to an employer, your employee is the most valuable commodity that you have, whether it's a new employee that's coming in or it's a senior employee that you've had for quite some time. Making sure that they have the tools that they need every single day to, as you had said, Tony, get home in the same manner that they started their day is
Right.
going to help increase employee engagement. It also increases employee retention, and it makes you a much more attractive employer than maybe some of your counterparts because that's what spreads, and the
Yeah.
cost it takes to retrain employees, it can be astronomical. So I would look at this from a big picture. First and foremost, do everything you can to prevent injuries from happening on the job, starting with education of leadership, starting with clear and concise policies, with safety audits, make sure all of those things have been done. And then making sure that the people who are coming into work are good quality individuals that are willing to maybe go through a physical, go through a drug screen, able to kind of start off on the right foot. They're going to know that you're making that investment in them, and therefore they're going to make that investment into you, into your organization as well.
Yeah, very well recapped. I mean, in the manufacturing, constructions, trades, our core industries, there are so few and far between people to hire as it is. There's an employment shortage. And when an employer demonstrates that they're actively working on keeping the employees safe and that the leadership is behind it, you're going to attract the best that are available out of a very small pool. Well, Ruth, I want to thank you so much for participating in our podcast today, Compliance in Motion. I'm sure our listeners are going to get great takeaways and action items from the information that you shared. You certainly have the in depth expertise and skills to have pointed some folks in the right direction today. So thanks again, and I'll look forward to crossing paths with you out in the field.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.